following is a special presentation of WEDU Tampa, St. Petersburg, Sarasota.
Bill Moyers has been a divinity student, a presidential spokesman, and an author and an award-winning television producer. But he drew angry fire recently from conservatives for his public television program Now. Conservatives called it left-wing, and some wanted Congress to cut off all funding for PBS. The man at the center of the controversy, Bill Moyers, next on WEDU Interview. Bill Moyers, welcome to WEDU.
My pleasure.
Great to have you here.
Thank you.
I want to ask you about the Now television program, which has caused so much controversy. You started it off, you've written, as trying to further the conversation of democracy. What did you mean by that?
Well, when PBS asked me to take this series on right after 9/11, and they wanted a new broadcast that was not based in the Beltway, that would cover stories nobody else was covering, and that would put on people who wouldn't be heard otherwise. So I really set out to engage what I call the conversation of democracy. We did lots of reporting, and it was really the reporting that the right-wingers at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting didn't like, because we were reporting stories that were at odds with the official view of reality. We were reporting on conflicts of interest at the Interior Department. We were reporting on the abuse of money in politics. We were reporting on Dick Cheney's private meetings with the energy industry to ask them to divvy up the subsidies that they wanted. We were reporting on troops in Iraq not getting the body armor they needed. We were doing the kind of hard-hitting reporting that you expect of an investigative unit. Mike Wallace, 60 Minutes, we were doing that for PBS. But I was also putting on a lot of people whose views were contrary to the administration's. Now, I had lots of conservatives on. Richard Viguerie, the founder of mail order television for the Republican Party. Grover Norquist, the Rasputin or the Lenin of the Republican conservative movement. Ralph Reed, the head of the Christian Coalition. I had lots of conservatives on. But I also put on a lot of people who challenged the administration, who told a different version from the official view of reality. And these right-wingers, the new right-wingers at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting did not like that.
Well, when you see publications like Human Events or other conservative publications say that you're a liberal and you were bringing a liberal agenda to PBS and that you were marching in lockstep with liberalism, what do you say to that?
I don't know what marching in lockstep with liberalism is. I guess if I confess to being a liberal, it's because I'm tolerant, I'm open to other viewpoints, exactly the opposite of Human Events, which is kind of like Pravda, you know, the right talking to the right. My first book was called Listening to America, 1970, a bestseller, because I listened to all kinds of people, and I've done that as a journalist. I mean, I did serve in a Kennedy and a Johnson administration. I do believe in progressive government that tries to level the playing field, but as a journalist, I'm open to all viewpoints. I'm open to all voices, and the problem is the right wing has managed to persuade sufficient numbers of people today that good journalism is liberalism, that if we report what flies in the face of their ideology or their theology, they say, liberal, because that's an easy, cheap way. It's libel by label. It's an easy way to discredit a message that you don't want the American people to believe. You know the story that really got to Kenneth Tomlinson's goat? Tomlinson was the chairman of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, maneuvered into office by Karl Rove, President Bush's right-wing strategist. And it was Tomlinson who raised such hell secretly and then finally publicly about our broadcast. But he was at home one night and he watched an hour report we did from a small town in Pennsylvania that had been devastated by so-called free trade policies in which jobs are sent overseas, outsourced to Honduras and Guatemala, and people who were making $17, $18, $19 an hour are now making $6, $7 an hour if they have a job. They've lost their benefits. So we did an honest reporting from that town about how people were groping with these life-wrenching changes. And it was a fair report. It was called A Question of Fairness. Is the American economy fair to ordinary people? Well, Tomlinson was watching, and he said what he saw was liberal advocacy journalism. Well, if reporting on what happens to ordinary people from circumstances beyond their control and their indifference to the government's indifference to them is liberalism, hey, I plead guilty.
It's interesting because Lou Dobbs, who's the conservative commentator, is delving into those very issues on CNN. Let me ask you this question, sure, which ties in. That is that Jim Hightower, the Texas populist, says that it's not really a question of left and right. We shouldn't pay attention to that. We should look at top and bottom, that's really the divide today in American society.
The gap between the richest Americans and the poorest Americans is the largest since 1929. Now, some of your viewers are old enough to remember that 1929 was the year of the stock market crash and the beginning of the Great Depression. You can't have a healthy society when you have those great disparities in living standards. We also have had a strong middle class in this country since the end of the Second World War. The middle class today in America is finding it harder and harder to send their kids to college. Tuitions are soaring, harder and harder to meet the daily cost of life, to provide health insurance. The middle class is being hollowed out. I think that what's happening to ordinary Americans is the biggest story of our time. It's not terrorism. It is the failure of the American dream to open opportunities for increasing numbers of people. So I've been covering that story. Actually, I've been covering the class war since 1950, when I went to work at the age of 16 for a little newspaper in East Texas, where 16 housewives decided they were not going to pay their contribution to the Social Security tax for their domestic employees. Mm-hmm. These were good people. I knew them. They were the mothers of my friends. They were the wives of the business people in community. But they decided they weren't going to pay the income tax. I won awards by covering that story as a 16-year-old reporter. And ever since, when I've had a chance, I've been covering what happens to ordinary people in America. It is a great story.
But some people would hear that term class war and say, well, there you go, liberal agenda, that's what the liberal agenda is.
You know, every time we talk about class war or talk about inequality, every time we talk about inequality, the right wing uses the word class war. The Wall Street Journal is the worst of it. The editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, run by a right-winger named Paul Gigot. Every time Democrats start saying, or Republican, or liberals start saying, or journalists start saying, this isn't a fair society anymore. We don't have a fair economy anymore. Class war, they say, class war. Well, that's their way of trying to divert and distract attention from the merits of the case and the integrity of the reporting. Mm-hmm. They try to pour syrup on it, or they try to pour something else on it to make sure that the audience out there doesn't listen to the facts of the situation.
What do you make of this argument, and you hear it a lot, especially coming from Congress and elsewhere, that because we've got the Discovery Channel, because we've got the History Channel, that public broadcasting is no longer relevant, that the market has filled a need that was once filled by public broadcasting?
Every channel you mentioned is a commercial channel. And there are some that they're driven by market forces. Their purpose is to deliver as many eyeballs to an advertiser as they can at any given moment. For all of our flaws in public broadcast, and we have them, if we become irrelevant, it will be because we failed this opportunity, not because there are so many channels out there. You surf those channels, they're all doing the same thing. If you can get beyond the commercials, most of what you see is redundant from some other channel. I was present at the creation of public broadcasting when Lyndon Johnson signed the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967, establishing what we now have today as PBS NPR. We believe that there should be one channel, not only free of commercials, but free of commercial values. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that there are some things in society that the market and capitalism don't deliver.
For instance?
Public schools. Market doesn't give us public schools. Market doesn't give us public libraries. Market doesn't give us public parks and public squares. We have to create those from our collective common good. And that's what public broadcasting. We did not want to be driven by commercial values. There has to be one channel that has not made its peace with the little lies and fantasies of the merchandising product. You know, Rob, you can tell a lot about the producer of a television program if you know that he or she, in the case of Robin, if you know that he or she is looking out and sees a nation of consumers or a nation of citizens. If you think of our business as serving a nation of consumers or a community of consumers, then you're going to try to sell them something. But if you look out and see a nation of citizens, you know there's something you want to share with them. That they come to television not to be hustled, not to be manipulated, but to be trusted as mature individuals who can make up their own minds, and you want to share an experience with them, whether it's an interview or a documentary or a travel program or a children's program. I mean, this is the last channel in America where children are not subjected hour by hour by hour to somebody's effort to sell them something. I don't want my 3 grandchildren, my 5 grandchildren to go to television in the morning and people trying to sell them toys or trying to sell them iPods or that sort of thing. That's what we're about. Now, we fail that often. I tremble a little bit when I see what look like commercials to me beginning to appear on public broadcasting. And we have to resist that temptation, or the critics will have a case to make that we're not any different from the 500, 600, soon to be 1,000 channels driven by commercial imperatives.
Let's talk about the direction that television has gone. You've worked in television for more than 25 years, a television analyst, a senior analyst for
35
CBS.
years.
So 35 years.
Yeah.
You've been doing it a long time. You've seen the changes. Recently there was a great film about Fred Friendly and Edward R. Murrow standing up to Senator Joseph McCarthy. Could that take place? Could a journalist or a team of journalists on a commercial station today stand up to somebody that does what McCarthy did back in the early 1950s?
Well, they could if they were prepared to join the unemployment lines, because most of these big companies that now control most of what we see, read, and hear. There are 7 companies that dominate American media today, and they're big businesses. They're not driven by journalistic imperatives. In fact, the more concentration that has come in the media world, the lower on the hierarchy of corporate values journalism has been driven. I mean, when Disney bought ABC, Michael Eisner said on public radio, I don't want Disney covering ABC. Why? Because his news business is at odds with journalism. Journalism is to get as close as possible to the verifiable truth. Michael Eisner didn't like the Michael Moore film because at that very time Disney was having dealings with Governor Jeb Bush down here in Florida, and he didn't want an attack on Bush through an independent film like Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11, which has some flaws, but nonetheless it was a strong documentary. He didn't want that interfering with his relations in Jacksonville. And these big companies don't want their lobbyists in Washington, where they're seeking favors from government, relaxed regulation, subsidies and all that. They don't want some member of Congress or some executive at the White House saying, wait a minute, your reporter was down here asking uncomfortable questions. I mean, the media companies are big businesses now. They're not interested in journalism. And they make more money by driving the entertainment fare down to the lowest common denominator than they do by doing hard-hitting documentaries that get their corporate boardrooms in trouble. I say that it's getting so bad and the lowest common denominator is so common now that somebody's going to come along as an entrepreneur and make a fortune by creating a new channel that does really good quality programming for thinking men and women.
Are your days at PBS over and your association with programs such as now? I mean, would you consider going back into PBS and producing some sort of program?
I retired from the weekly broadcast that I had done for 3 years at PBS's request, and I did so for 2 reasons. One, I needed a break. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm 70 years old and I feel young at 70, but at the same time I don't have the energy to run a staff of 100 that I used to have. But I also retired from the broadcast because I realized that a right-wing cabal was gradually and then swiftly taking over the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is the umbrella group that oversees public broadcasting. By the way, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was established in 1967 to be a heat shield between Congress, from which the money comes, to the stations, and the producers like you and the journalists like me who were supposed to be free of political influence. But I was watching as the right wing, the present president of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is the former co-chair of the Republican National Committee. Now, if that had been the co-chair of the Democratic National Committee, put in as the president of CPB, just imagine what the other side would have done. But I saw them encroaching. I saw them beginning to try to meddle with the programming. I saw them begin to try to intimidate the journalists and producers. And I figured that I would be in a better position to stand up and fight them, as I did, if I were not on the air. Mm-hmm. So I resigned because I needed a break at 70, and I resigned so I could be more effectively, independently fighting a partisan takeover of public broadcasting. I don't believe public broadcasting should reflect Democratic Party interest or Republican Party interest. And I went public in order to protect the independence of public broadcasting so that your viewers know we're not doing this because you have a partisan agenda or I have a partisan agenda.
You were trained as a divinity student. What do you think about the role of religion in politics these days in America?
I wish there were more of it. I mean, I wish there were more of the kind of religion that is open to other views, that is humble, that recognizes that dogmatism and creed are not a part of the democratic experience. I mean, I'm a believer. I grew up in a Christian home. I'm a seeker. I have a Master of Divinity degree. I read widely in the field. I hope I come to some understanding, but while I'm still on this earth, of the transcendental matters that affect us human beings. But I'm also a secularist in the sense that I believe democracy is not an arena for religious forces to contend and for one faction to outvote the other faction. I don't want somebody telling me who God is or what God is, and I don't want that person's belief being enshrined in legislation. I believe America's greatest contribution to political science has been the notion of the separation of church and state, that you are free to follow your conscience, but that government cannot enshrine your conscience into law, and that the pew and the precinct are separate theaters of America, of human endeavor. The pew is a theater where we try to find our relationship with the transcendental reality. The precinct is where we try to solve our differences politically without putting a gun to each other's head or putting a rope around each other's neck.
But a lot of people see civil law and the laws passed by Congress or their state legislature as in conflict with their religious beliefs. And so they are organizing, they're energized, they're out there in the public sphere, in the state capitals, in Washington, trying to get those laws to conform with what they believe as a spiritual person.
Well, I believe, there's a difference between spiritual reality, biblical beliefs, and moral values. Some of the most moral people I know are non-believers in a traditional religion. Their morality comes from the reality that we have to live together and figure out rules and regulations that keep us from stepping on each other all of the time. I really believe that people of faith should come into the open square and contest for their values. I mean, I was in the White House. I was in Washington and the White House in the great civil rights movement when Martin Luther King and other preachers and Jewish rabbis championed the equality and dignity of all Americans and came out and argued their position in the public. And we had the great civil rights movement at that time. Where I disagree with the people you're talking about is that I don't think, although I'm a Bible reading, grew up a Bible believing Christian, I don't believe that the biblical, I can't treat the Bible as revelation for positions in politics. I may want to read it as a revelation of a story about God that people have believed for a long time and that's worth my attention, but I don't believe I have the right to take the Bible as revealed, the revelation of God, and out and argue with you and say, you can't argue with me, Rob, because I know what God has spoken. God has spoken it right here. I mean, the argument that homosexuality is a sin comes on the reading of the tiniest sliver of an Old Testament text that, if you followed literally, would mean you wouldn't do a lot of things that you do. Now, homosexuality is a controversial issue, but it's not something someone chooses. It is something is born with, and I can't believe that a God in heaven would punish people for the way they're born. And for you to argue with me, or somebody to argue with me, well, the Bible says that it's a sin, is for me to say, I'm sorry, that's not an acceptable argument in a society that has to make its decisions on political compromise. You can't compromise with somebody. If I know that I know God's mind on this issue, you can't compromise with me.
In recent weeks, there's been a lot of talk, especially in conservative religious circles, that Christianity is under attack. Christmas is under attack. People that are Bible-believing Christians are under attack, and that they are really trying to defend themselves against an onslaught that would take away their ability to practice their faith.
You know, that is such an absurd argument. I took a big chart that has the picture of every top official in Washington on it the other day in my office, laid it out on the table, said to my staff, look at this. Every one of these men and women is a Christian. Mm-hmm. I mean, if there's a war against Christianity, it's been lost. I mean, the secularists have lost it because the United States government is full of Christians. I walked down Fifth Avenue at Christmas, looked at the Christmas tree, the traditional Christmas tree, and I said, wow, if there's a war against Christianity, somebody forgot to kill that tree. I mean, that's absurd. Every Christian in this country is free to run for office. You just can't come into a classroom and insist that Christianity is the version of faith that your students have to teach, or that intelligent design, which is a religious theory, can substitute for scientific evidence. You just can't do that. But the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, is set up to protect all of us, Christians, non-Christians, Jews, Muslims, agnostics, from other people's beliefs.
We fought a war in Afghanistan to get rid of a really dangerous religious-based government. Do you see any parallels, or is it too much of a stretch to say that the United States might face the same kind of danger if one brand of religion begins to control every aspect of our government?
Well, I don't think that's going to happen because we're too pluralistic society. We have a great tradition of tolerance, and America is made up of so many immigrants from so many places around the world, and I don't think we're in danger of a Taliban-like government or a religious right government or a religious left government. I mean, the whole genius of our society is that we keep those issues out of our voting. But I do think it's possible that people can become so angry about their religion and so indignant about others who don't believe the way they do that we could have a very nasty society, even if we never have a fascist or religiously sectarian government. I mean, I don't believe in a pious, condescending attitude toward tolerating other people's beliefs. I really believe in engaging what you believe and listening to you and then sharing my beliefs, and that neither one of us is going to convert each other. Where you get into trouble is when you come to Congress, let's say, and say, I'm going to cast my vote because I believe my constituents have told me this is God's mind on this issue. You can't have a democratic debate when one side claims to be speaking for God. That's the greater danger that we will face in this country. I don't think it is from a theocracy. I don't think Americans would stand for a theocracy. By the way, I know a lot and have a lot. I grew up in a very conservative town. It was conservatively Democratic then. It's a conservative Republican town now. A lot of Christians down in Marshall, Texas, don't agree with the theocrats, don't agree with the inanities and absurdities of a Pat Robertson or a Jerry Falwell or people like that. People like Robertson who get up and say 9/11 is God's punishment on America, or Katrina, the hurricane on the Gulf Coast, was because of the abortion rate in America. I know a lot of principled conservatives who say that's bull.
We're on PBS.
Yeah, on PBS. That's right. I don't think we're in danger of a theocracy. I think we're in danger of a political party becoming a theocracy. Republicans have a great tradition in this country. The party of Lincoln, the party of Teddy Roosevelt, the party of progressive visions of America on the environment and public lands and all of that. The Republican Party is in danger of being governed by its theocratic minority, the most militant, most insatiable faction in the Republican coalition today is the religious right. And unless the Republican Party works out a way, I mean, you watch Pat Robertson on the Christian broadcasting. Pat Robertson, I think, is patently a lunatic, if I may say so. And yet on that show, his show, the 700 Club, where he utters these things like, let's assassinate the head of a foreign government, or it's 9/11 was caused by God's punishment on America, you'll see one Republican senator after another appear on there honoring and humoring him. And what they ought to say is, I'm not going to come on that show because Pat Robertson does not represent the heart and soul of the Republican Party.
So in the 30 seconds that we have left, for those people that might think that the pendulum has swung a little too far to the right for their tastes here in the U.S. and they're afraid about the future, you're not afraid?
Oh no, we Americans are not more virtuous than the other people. We're not more intelligent than other people, but unlike others, we have the First Amendment, which gives the passengers on the ship the right to climb to the deck of the ship and grab the captain by the elbow and say, that's an iceberg out there, turn course. And I believe, although I worry about the apathy of Americans right now, I believe that when we get our backs up, when we really decide it's the right thing to do, or that our beliefs and our values are threatened by dogmatism of any kind, the new left in the 60s or the new right in now, I think we've got the capacity to rebel, and we need a little rebellious spirit in America right now.
That's democracy in action.
Yes.
Bill Moyers, thank you for sitting down with us. Good to
My
have you
pleasure,
here.
Rob.
Thanks for watching WEDU Interview. I'm Rob Lorei.